Morning, everyone. We will call this special board meeting to order with my mic being turned on. Now we'll call it to order. First start with taking attendance, which now it's working. So last time people still said they couldn't hear me on the Zoom, on the video. Do we need those speakers on? Maybe we don't need the speakers on. Now they're not on. Yay. Great. Please let the record show that 4 of 4 board members are present, and as well as our general manager and board secretary. And we'll start with then the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand and remove your hats? Ready, begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And public comments on non-agenda items. Mrs. McKeown, please.
Members of the public may address the board on matters not listed on this agenda. The board cannot take action on any item that is not on the agenda. The board or staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed, or may ask questions for clarification. These items may also be referred to staff or scheduled on a future agenda. There will be a separate opportunity for public comment for each item on the agenda.
Are there any items off the agenda for public comment? Kathy?
Good morning, everybody. Carrie 3430-448. I would really like you guys to once again reconsider getting a fifth director. We're talking about a 7-month span. Every time there's been a vacancy in the past, it has been filled from you folks making that decision and determination. If you're thinking it's going to be an unfair advantage for re-election, maybe there's somebody out there that would be just willing to help the community out for 7 months. That's an option as well. I just think that it is for the better of our community to have a full board. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw another hand, I think. Yes? Please.
Hi, my name is Judy Mitchell, 3461, and I just wanted to make sure that the board got my emails yesterday. I know Mr. Hahn did, regarding my tenants on Winford Court, because I got the Winford letter because they had not paid their water bill, and I wanted to resolve that issue. And I would like to have an appointment with whoever I need to start hands on it.
Thank you, Judy. Probably can make that appointment from the front desk.
Work with our staff, certainly.
Who?
Well, Lori Carlin is currently there, so you can ask for her.
Mhm.
She's there now.
Thank you, Judy. Any other hands? Yes? Jiva?
I sent an email to Bill the other day regarding seeing trash, cardboard out in front of the recycling was just sitting there. And the attendant was just looking out as people are coming in pulling. So I don't know if they had caught them and just hadn't moved it or said anything. But then my secondary question is, oh, we haven't been getting stickers for a while. So we're not asked for a visiting card at all. So we have 2 vehicles without stickers. So I'm wondering, how are they identifying that we're residents? Because I don't think they have us all memorized, all our vehicles. So I just want to bring up that up and hope that they would start checking our cards. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiva. Anybody else? All right. Let's rock on to discussion item A, special taxes, police and gate. I think I'll hand it off to Bill first.
Apologies.
No worries.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. We have a
presentation today, and the intent is to have a discussion by the board regarding special taxes for police and gate services. So we've got a PowerPoint. We've provided it to most people there, and if you'll indulge me in going through this, should take us 10 or 15 minutes, and hopefully helps inform the board and the public of this particular issue. So this is the same PowerPoint presentation that I made about a month and a half ago. I think it was at the April board meeting. But it is to focus on continuing financial stability and sustainability for the district. This began about 4 years ago, where the board undertook the efforts to begin addressing structural deficiencies, i.e. that the revenue and expenses were pretty much unable to be balanced. So we started with the enterprise funds. Those were the most in need, specifically water. So we tackled that first, and part of the story is that those had not been increased for about 11 years. That was a significant study and engagement on the district's part with the residents, and that was successful. There were, I'll say few objections to that. We certainly had some, but under the Proposition 218 process, what occurs is you make an objection, and we went through that for water. We then picked up sewer because that was the next needy enterprise fund, and then solid waste. And as it notes there, it's been 11 years or 12 years or 14 years since there had been any adjustments on those rates. So consequently, that success allows those funds to be financially stable. They are at least sustainable through the 5-year periods that we did the modeling for. We have 3 other special revenue funds that support the district and what we do. The first is a roads assessment. That was set up 26 years ago at an amount of $340 with no indexing. So it doesn't increase. It was set at $340. It's still $340. Similarly, the police tax is $80. That's been in effect for 16 years, and the gate tax, $75. I'm sorry, the police was 26 years as well, and the gate tax at 75 is 16 years old. This PowerPoint and that discussion at that board meeting was to talk about police and gate, and specifically with regard to the roads fund and that special assessment. And it is a special assessment, different than a special tax, a little different procedures to go through. But that's not under consideration for this reason. We are looking to do kind of the second phase of what is the capital replacement plan for our infrastructure. The first phase was an inventory, identification of all of those things of the water system or of the sewer system, the infrastructure. We have that. Because we have 110 miles of system and all of the valves and 3,500 service lines and all of that, we're looking for an engineering firm to essentially go through that and develop a plan of attack. What do we do first? So we don't have that. We're looking for the engineering firm. We have an RFP out to engineering companies. So without that, we don't have the big picture water issue, and so consequently, we're not looking at the roads. We don't know yet what the prioritization will be for the water, but it seems logical that if we're going to be taking some action on the water line, we don't spend money fixing the road on top of it until we know who's on first, who's on second, and what is the sequencing of all of that. And I think it's prudent until we have the water. And then there is a an approach for assessing condition of the road, and so there may be a way of prioritization that looks at water as well as the road in terms of timing. But so that's not being considered here. So. Just some statistics that we had presented that the tax, when it initially implemented for the police department, was 62%. Today it's about 15%. And the budget has increased on average 6.3%. And so we have this graph that depicts the increasing costs relative to a flat revenue source. The gate tax hasn't been changed, and it generated 92% of the gate's annual costs for operation, and today it's about 40%. Those costs have increased on average about 7.6% per year. And here's a picture of the graph that shows the relatively static revenue and increasing costs over time. So our general fund is reliant and dependent upon property taxes. So just another set of information. Since the gate tax was established, our property tax revenues have increased about 3.8% per year. Meanwhile, the 7.6% expense is increased over that. So similarly for police, the property taxes, it's a 10-year additional period, so it's 4.4%, and meanwhile the budget increase is 6.3%. So concluding this one, revenues are flat, expenses continue to climb. We will be reaching a point where it really does have to be addressed from a fiscal management perspective. So we wanted to begin this conversation and discussion with the board and then subsequently with the community. Part of what we've done is to create a model. The model for the general fund is intended to take into account the condition of the general fund itself, with or without any changes. Our capital improvement plan, it's a 20-year plan. It's been presented to the board. The Finance Committee, Infrastructure Committee have reviewed and passed on their, I'll say, appreciation anyway. And so we've used the utility rate studies and the template, expanded on that a lot to create the model that we're going to go show you today. And three things that we recognize the similarities between this effort and the utility fund rate adjustments is intent of the action is to make sure we have enough revenue to cover our operational expenses, make sure we have enough revenue for the capital that's needed. We can talk a little bit about that, but we have, as you'll see in this 20-year CIP, some extensive capital needs being planned for the future. So I can talk a little bit more about the CIP when we get there. And then the third thing was we have a minimum fund balance policy for all of our funds. And as we had done in the utility rate studies, at the end of the planning period, we looked to have a rate adequate enough to keep that fund balance reserve in a positive relative to the policy. So we did that with all of those other three rates, and that's also part of what this model will show. So we've taken a look and made some projections, and part of the conclusion of that presentation and this narrative is that if there are really no changes, the model indicates that we'll be exhausting the excess reserve in the fund balance in 7 to 8 years. So it gives us some time to make some corrections so that that doesn't occur. This was the last slide I think that I had presented. We've added two things to it. Part of what this indicates is that, I think I had said 6 or 7 years. This indicates at 2029 we will be falling below the fund balance requirements, and by 2033 the general fund will be in the red. This is a picture of the model, and I hope you can bear with me. There's a lot of information there, and so rather than, because I will admit I've shown the model to some folks, and I think after a bit their eyes kind of glaze and roll, and so we're going to try and summarize it, simplify it, hopefully give you the message as to what are the impacts and so on. This is kind of the first page, so this is the second page. So this is ultimately the summary of all these pieces that I'm going to explain to you. Any questions, directors, yet? Okay. So then I'm going to walk everyone through the kind of construction of the model and how it's intended to work. So the first approach is to identify future expenses. So again, we're looking out 20 years, and I use that, and we've kind of adopted it here at the district because I think it gives you, as it actually did in this case, more time to be prepared for the ups and downs. And in this case, it identified kind of that time frame where we're going to be running into the red. And similarly, with these projections on expenses, this is the detail. So if some of you are familiar with the water rate study or the other studies, but the water rate in particular is kind of where we first saw and used this kind of modeling. The whole upper area are literally the budget line items, where they're at, how much they will be in the future. The bottom part is really more of the escalator costs. Oops, sorry. And this is maybe a little more detail. You can kind of see we're talking about these various expenses, but the escalation factors. So part of putting the model together was to be consistent with all of the modeling that we'd already done. So the district had paid for the initial water rate study, and that's what we're using as kind of the template. And then staff prepared the rate studies for the sewer and the solid waste in-house. But we are using the same escalation or inflation indexing, if you will, in our model that was in those. When we have all of that information, part of what it ended up doing for our presentations was creating a summary. We called it a pro forma, and it was to help summarize what the effects are. And we used that to create the recommended rate adjustments. And again, those were intended with all this information to cover operations, capital, reserve fund balance. So this is the summary, and what you get from it then is we have a current rate in the gate case of $75. We would have an increase under the model, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. What the model suggests is $185 a year rather than $75. It also incorporates I went back. I've got to get my buttons right. Thank you, Christy. It also includes a indexing of 3%. And this shows that 3% is for the duration of the 20-year model. And this is kind of where we focus on and look to minimize, I guess, the contribution of the general fund. So this particular piece of all of the puzzle says if you had $185 and you indexed it 3% during the course of this, you would be minimizing any impact to the general fund. So, you know, we rather than having 394, you got a pointer for this?
No, it doesn't work on TV.
Ah, shoot. Okay. Well, so you can see in the first column under budgeted, and where it says, I'm going to go back now, right here, that next column says 394, and then you'll see the columns after that are 20 and 16 and 19. So with that rate and those indexings, there's almost no contribution from the general fund to the gate. Okay? So that shows it being carried out. Next area was the police. So this is the police department's projections out 20 years, just to give you an idea of how big the spreadsheet is. Again, a little bit more to show you the level of detail that goes in by line item of expenditures. And again, we've used the same escalator factors for future projections that we have used in our previous modeling. And again, we come up with a police operations pro forma. In this case, the current rate of $80 is projected to go to $500 per year, and that also includes the 3% indexing per year. The result is, rather than a $1.5 million contribution from the general fund, it goes down to looks like 87 and 130 and so on. But when we look at those numbers across the board out 20 years, as much as we can, it minimizes the general fund